Welcome to this week's edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Not just a very big week for Freedom Watch, but more importantly for the American people. Here's what's going on this week, and you can go to Freedom Watch's website at freedomwatchusa.org and see it in detail. And also I urge you, because we need it. We need to get bigger. We are your Justice Department. You don't have a Justice Department. You have it as Gestapo under the Biden administration. We need to get bigger. We need more lawyers. We need more paralegals. We need more office space. We need to file more cases. But here's what we're doing, and it shows you that we put your money where our mouth is. And I hate to be so crass, but the fact is we need the help. So I wanted to get it up front. Now, here's what we did this week, and you can see it not just at freedomwatchusa.org, but you can also go to Freedom Watch's YouTube channel. We indicted initially. We tried, and then we convicted Anthony Fauci, who I call Dr. Mengele, for his experiments with regard to COVID-19. Mengele, of course, was the Hitler's doctor who experimented on Jews, retarded people, and others, killing many of them. What Fauci did was to send the seeds of COVID-19, a SARS virus, from a lab in Fort Detrick, Maryland, our military lab, which does experiments on viruses. In fact, it creates bioweapons, much like the communist Chinese do and others do. It's illegal under international law, but it never stops our establishment from doing it. He sent it to this Wuhan lab, a military lab, with $3 million approximately from the Obama-Biden coffers, the administration, to do research which was largely illegal here. He had reason to know that there could be a big accident, or by design, it could be released because that lab creates bioweapons. And the communist Chinese are not exactly friendly to the United States. They're not even friendly to their own people, whether it's in communist China or here. And consequently, he is directly responsible for the death of over 10 million people and counting throughout the world, more than Hitler killed in World War II during the Holocaust. Someone needed to hold him accountable, and it was your Freedom Watch that did. And now that we have the conviction, we're going to have a clarion call, I call it, a directive to law enforcement to arrest Fauci. And the same is true for Biden. Weeks before that, we convicted him for bribery from communist China, Ukraine, and Russia. So I want you to go back and look at some of our podcasts and also look at the broadcast of this radio show, because I discuss that even in the District of Columbia, the most leftist place in this country, you have a situation where if you know of someone committing a felony on probable cause, as a citizen, you can arrest them and turn them over to law enforcement. Now, we would never do anything other than peaceful. We don't use physical means. We don't use coercive means. But technically speaking, Biden and Fauci should be arrested by law enforcement. Now, on the other hand, what do you have on Capitol Hill? You got a bunch of court jesters and clowns in the Republican Party that play around talking about impeachment inquiries. You got Senator Rand Paul sending criminal referrals of Fauci for the lies he told Congress that he didn't do gain-of-function research in Wuhan, China, and elsewhere. He knew that nothing was going to happen, so he sends it to the Biden Justice Department and uses it for political reasons and also for fundraising. So this is what we're dealing with here. And it goes far beyond that. Look at COVID-19 in and of itself. We all know that it emanated from the lab in Wuhan, China. Why was that covered up? It was covered up because Fauci and the American government at the time gave the murder weapon to the Wuhan lab. That's why we've never gotten a definitive answer as to who's responsible. You think with the mass surveillance that the NSA does, they get every single communication worldwide and store it for 5 years in a supercomputer in Colorado, that they don't know the origins of COVID-19? So this is what we're dealing with. Not just corrupt foreign governments, but our own corrupt government at home. Now, your Freedom Watch isn't stopping with Fauci. We have a class action in Dallas, Texas, in the federal court there against China for all the damage that has been done. China has been evading service of process now for a few years. We finally got the court to order alternative service of process, and they will be served shortly, the Wuhan lab, the communist Chinese Wuhan lab. Again, this is your Freedom Watch that takes action when no one else does. There are other public interest groups out there that get documents. They crow about it, they go on TV, but they're not taking action like this. I'm a trial lawyer now of 46 years. I know what to do, and I will stick my neck out for the American people, for you and your loved ones, and me and my loved ones. Now, another thing we did this week is we filed a class action in the Northern District of Florida, the federal court, on behalf of peaceful January 6 protesters, because we now know that much like happened in 2013 when Edward Snowden revealed the mass surveillance on the American people, and I was the only one at Freedom Watch to succeed in getting preliminary injunctions against that mass surveillance because it was in violation of the Fourth Amendment and First Amendment of our US Constitution, that the same thing occurred with the peaceful protesters that were in Washington that day and beyond that day. They've been illegally surveilled. So we are suing for an excess of $1 billion for the class, the entire class, which could amount to hundreds of thousands of people for that matter. We think that many people were in Washington, and more people than just were in Washington are undoubtedly being surveilled, probably yours truly as well, undoubtedly. Anyone who stands up for the rule of law and will oppose this left dictatorship that we live under. But it could also have the effect of throwing out the prosecutions and the convictions, because if illegally obtained evidence was used to indict the peaceful protesters and to convict them, then, and was not disclosed as Brady material to the defendants, then there would be a good case to have everything thrown out. And you wouldn't have to pardon them, as President Trump said he would do. And of course, we know, although I don't take positions in elections, but were President Trump to win, I obviously like him and I express my personal opinion, but he's got a lot of problems. He may not make it past the general election right now because of the evil Democrats and what they have done to him. So this is an extremely important case. Again, go to freedomwatchusa.org and see what we have accomplished on your behalf in bringing this case. And again, we need the financial support. This is going to be extremely costly. Last but not least, just today was filed on behalf of clients a motion to conduct prejudgment attachment of Iran. We know, and we're going to talk about this with Cliff Kinkade, my colleague and friend who's coming on later, of America's survival. But Biden committed treason yet again by releasing $6 billion of frozen Iranian assets back to the regime, back to the mullahs, that will undoubtedly be used with regard to terrorism against not just the United States, Israel, but also others, including Arabic countries like Saudi Arabia, as the two are loggerheads. One is Shiite, one is Sunni. They hate each other. We are in a very, very difficult situation. And I might add, Saudi Arabia is our ally. Iran is our enemy. So go to see what we are doing and go to freedomwatchusa.org. Contribute to our cause. Take this seriously because the country is on its last legs. The country cannot survive much longer with the evil Democrats who are in control of our government, who have imposed a leftist noose around our necks, and a Republican Party that simply raises money and runs around Capitol Hill like chickens without their heads on, like the Keystone Cops, as I've said many times this week. It's time for the American people to rise up. It's time for us to do what we need to do. It's time to put our foot down and to support groups like Freedom Watch. This is what I was born to do. This is what I believe in. This is what, with the grace of God, and I look for his guidance. I'm not saying I am God, and sometimes I get things wrong, but we have to do something. We just can't sit here and keep taking punches. And the American people are on the ropes. We have 2 minutes left in this segment. I just want to conclude it by saying that I want you to listen carefully to what Cliff Kinkade has to say, because he agrees with me. We have a criminal, brain-dead president. The guy is so far gone physically and mentally that probably in a matter of months, he'll be gone. Not just as a political candidate, but he probably will die of his own volition because that's what bad shape he's in. We, the American people, need to rise up now before it is too late, because the sad reality is that both Democrats and Republicans want this guy to stay in power. The Democrats want him to stay in power long enough that they could have him replaced as a candidate with someone like Michelle Obama or Gavin Newsom. And the Republicans are just playing games with impeachment and anything else because they want to run against an extremely weak president. But you have to remember what the goal here is to save this country. It's not to play political games. And we are playing political games, and they're playing it, when I say we, they, with the lives of not just you, but of your kids and grandkids. At any moment, because of the international crises that are out there, the entire world could go up in flames. And yet we do not have any leadership in this country, the leading country in the world. The only country that can hold the glue together to allow the human race to continue. So I'll be right back with Cliff Kinkade. Until then, go to freedomwatchusa.org. Please contribute. Get my book, It Takes a Counter-Revolution, Wake Up America. You can see the legal basis for what I do and for what Freedom Watch does. And please recognize that we are different than any other public interest group out there. We are actually there to take action, not just to talk. I'll be right back. I'm back with Cliff Kinkade, a longtime friend, colleague, fellow true conservative, president of America's Survival, Inc., and you can find him at usasurvival.org. We're here to talk about what's been going on with Iran, what's been going on with Russia, what's been going on with Ukraine, because Cliff is a true international expert. We agree on the issues that we're going to be discussing today. We don't always have to agree, but we agree on this, and I'd say 99% of the time I agree with Cliff and he agrees with me. But let's get into what's been going on with Iran initially, Cliff, is that we have a president who basically, to put it bluntly, committed treason. He just turned over $6 billion in South Korean banks that were frozen as a result of Iranian sanctions, got 5 Iranians back to the United States, and then gave back 5. So I don't understand why you can't just trade 5 for 5 if that's what you're going to do. But instead, the $6 billion obviously will go into more terrorism. And even if you take what our brain dead president has to say, and his idiot of a Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, who has engaged in scandal himself, saying that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, orchestrating that. The fact that it's going for so-called humanitarian aid doesn't in any way alleviate the fact the money's fungible. So that which you give to Iran for its people, to mollify its people, to prevent revolution, can then be used for terrorist activities, because you don't have to devote your money to paying them to stay quiet. Anyway, that's my take on it, but let's hear yours.
Larry, while members of Congress and a lot of us are concerned about all these shell companies the Bidens use to transfer money to Hunter and the big guy, what you just talked about is even bigger. This is really why impeachment has to be launched, not just an inquiry. We know what's happening. It is treason. It's high treason. And this trade with Iran, it's even worse than getting back that pothead WNBA star in exchange for the merchant of death, a former Russian military officer who was sending weapons to anti-American terrorists in Latin America. I mean, this time, as you point out, Iran is getting $6 billion. The whole foreign policy stinks to high heaven. We're giving them $6 billion so they can manufacture more weapons, more drones to send to Russia, so Russia can kill Ukrainians, but we're supposed to be supplying the Ukrainians with money to fight the Russians. This doesn't make any sense. It only makes sense if you look at it from the point of view of the Biden administration engaging in what you just said, treason, trying to support our enemies. This is a country, Iran, developing nuclear weapons with the assistance of Russia that we're supposed to be fighting through Ukraine in Europe. Let's get past the inquiry and go to full impeachment right now.
Well, I agree with you. And of course, the Democrats want to save Biden, at least for the time being, until they can insert someone to take his place for the 2024 elections. And the Republicans want him to remain too, because they think he'll be a weak candidate. So they basically just engage in what I've been calling a dog and pony show, like Keystone Cops, talking about impeachment inquiries. We know impeachment will never come. First of all, Kevin McCarthy's probably traded influence himself, just like Biden. I mean, they all have up there. And this is basically what we saw during the Clinton years, is that they just wanted to wound Clinton to prevent Al Gore from being elected, in the elections. So unfortunately, this is not the answer, Cliff, in terms of what the Republicans are going to do. We can't really ever depend on them. So how do you deal with it? How do we deal with it otherwise? Because we wouldn't be in this situation if the Republicans had been doing their job.
The only thing that can be done is to use, if McCarthy has the guts, and we all doubt that, to use the power of the purse that lies with the House of Representatives, which is nominally under Republican control. And they've got to cut off the money for all these foreign policy decisions and initiatives. They got to cut off the money, if they have the courage, for Jack Smith, this special counsel going after Trump, who learned his tactics, his legal terrorism at the International Criminal Court. And not a lot of people know that. This guy worked for 2 years learning legal terrorism at the International Criminal Court.
We're going to come into the next segment. We've got a little bit of time. Until then, go to Cliff's website and go to freedomwatchusa.org. Support our groups. We're doing some valuable work. We'll be right back. I'm back with Cliff Kinkade. We were talking about whether funds should be cut off for some of these foreign policy issues. Now, the question I ask, obviously, I'm in favor of reducing the budget and cutting expenditures. I mean, the amount of money we spend just in interest alone is driving up rampant inflation, notwithstanding the ultimate collapse of this country. But would we be cutting our nose off to spite our face in terms of some of the foreign policies, however few, that are valuable, such as, supporting Ukraine? I know Ukraine has problems. Ukraine, has difficulty with corruption. So do we in this country. I would probably say that they're probably no less corrupt than we are in many ways. But would we be cutting off the nose to spite our face and cutting off funding? And some, things that have been said about cutting off funds, for the FBI or for the Justice Department, however bad it is, and it is bad, and it frankly should be shut down and new agencies started. When you're in the middle of a problem here, which we have, with intelligence being conducted against this country by communist Chinese and others and whatever else is going on, would that be cutting the nose off to spite our face?
Larry, we got to cut off money for certain initiatives, certainly not aid for Ukraine. I think you and I agree that Biden got us into this mess in Ukraine when he said, it depended on whether Russia engaged in a minor incursion. That was a green light for Putin to move in. And Biden's policy has been one of no win. But in the overall scheme of things, what we're spending on Ukraine is less than 5% of the defense budget. So I would ratchet it up. But getting back to Iran for a second, before I get more into Ukraine, here's a bizarre aspect to their policy. And that is their Iran representative, their envoy, who was also part of the Barack Hussein Obama administration, was a guy named Rob Malley. His father was a member of the Egyptian Communist Party. About a month or so ago, Rob Malley, now doing the same kind of job for Biden, was suspended from his position because of controversies and questions over his security clearance. Nobody's resolved what the heck's going on with that. I mean, let's face it, Biden couldn't get a security clearance if he really had to undergo a background check. Neither could most of the people in his administration. But on Ukraine, it's the right policy. Just as the French supported the Americans in the American Revolution, we've got to support Ukraine. And I saw today that about 20 members, Republican members of the House and Senate, are now saying, enough is enough. Let's cut off the money. What? Look, we predicted all of this. I actually wrote this book. We did, some of my contributors, back in 2014, Back from the Dead. Putin is former KGB. He wants a genocide against Ukraine. The reason we're in this mess, as you know, is under Clinton, they had a Budapest memorandum that disarmed Ukraine with the connivance of Russia, took away all of Ukraine's 1,800 nuclear weapons, sent them back to Moscow. If you can believe that, this is why Ukraine today didn't have a deterrent to Putin. And for us just to give these people over, this is a Christian nation run by a president who's Jewish, under assault by the Russians, who claim somehow that Ukraine is a front for the Nazis, when it was Russia with Hitler, the Hitler-Stalin pact, that started World War II. Conservatives have to get their brains fixed and come out for more and better aid for Ukraine, in my view.
No, I agree with you completely. You know, the problem here is that we got into this war, and we are in this war. I mean, now we're talking about giving Ukraine long-range missiles and everything else. We are in the war. It's the old adage, either you get up on the dance floor and you dance, or you sit down. Now, Biden screwed around in the beginning. He gave Putin, in my view, the impression that we weren't going to do anything in any major way if he walked into Ukraine. And sure enough, he walked into Ukraine. It's a lot like what went on, you know, in the days, months, and years leading up to World War II with Neville Chamberlain and the appeasement and everything else. So we didn't have to be in this war, but now that we're in the war, we better finish it. And this, as much as I like President Trump, this is a real Achilles heel for him if he says that he's not going to support Ukraine. Zelensky the other day called his bluff and said, you know, you said you could solve this thing in 24 hours. Well, let us know now, better now than later. And of course, there was no response. But I hope the president, talking about Trump, because I don't consider Biden to be our president, frankly, I hope he reconsiders his position, because we have a situation, unfortunately, that was foisted upon us by a criminally minded, brain-dead president who took bribes with regard to Ukraine and the prosecutor there, who perverted the whole process. And as you know, we used our citizens' grand jury and a citizens' trial to convict him recently. And we are sending out a clarion call to law enforcement to, frankly, have Biden arrested, you know, peacefully and legally. And here's the thing, Cliff, I don't know if you're aware of this, but even in the District of Columbia, if you know of someone who's committing a felony and you have information, based on mere probable cause, you can arrest them and then you have to turn them over to law enforcement. I want to get your thoughts on this. Not everybody agrees with me, and that's fine. But the fact that we actually went through a process where we asked American citizens to decide whether there was probable cause to indict Biden for bribery from Communist China, Ukraine, and Russia, and for negligent homicide in Afghanistan. His actions led to the death of 13 GIs at Kabul airport, and then he killed 10 civilians to look tough with their kids. The fact that we went through that and we got an indictment, we told Biden and his son and his brother James that you could come and plead, you could come and defend yourself. They didn't have the respect to show up, so we tried them in abstention, and we gave them an opportunity, even after the conviction at sentencing, to come and defend themselves. They didn't do that either. The American people have the right to enforce the rules that are made by man and also by God, and we did that in our revolution. You know, when we declared independence, we said nature's God and God's laws was what's going to govern us. Well, now, under District of Columbia law, we have actually conviction. So we're going to be petitioning, you know, sheriffs and police to go and arrest Biden and to do it establishment, not to use violence to do it, but to turn himself in. And even if he doesn't, it sets an example for the American people to know that we have to take action ourselves before this country is totally destroyed. And we did the same thing with Fauci. You can go up on YouTube. We got 250,000 people watching it lately. We convicted him for negligent homicide. His actions led to the death of over 10 million people so far worldwide. He gave the seeds of COVID to the communist Chinese lab in Wuhan that makes bioweapons, took it out of Fort Detrick because we were experimenting with bioweapons ourselves there. And this man is perhaps the biggest criminal of the 21st century, but the Republicans sit there playing patty cakes, doing nothing. And so it's time for the American people to act. I'm still experiencing the effects of COVID. I think I had post-COVID. I've been sick for a month and a half. Mm-hmm. And many people, you know, have. And at one point I succumbed and got the first shot of the vaccine. I'm not sure I didn't get COVID from that either. But this is the country's out of control. So, I want to get your thoughts on these things. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm willing to put my neck on the chopping block, and Americans should be willing to do the same thing, because we don't have a Republican Party that stands in the stead for us.
I like your initiatives. I always have, Larry. Your idea of citizens' grand juries to go after these criminals because the Republicans are so slow in doing anything and going after the powers that be for the wrong reasons. Again, as I say, these shell companies, the bribery, this is all real corruption. I understand that. But we're dealing with the fate of America. That's why I started my group, and we named it America's Survival. Our survival is at stake. But your idea of citizens' grand juries going after Biden and the rest of them serves as an example to other lawyers who are patriots and who realize that we're being overpowered. I'm not a lawyer myself, but I can see it, overpowered by this legal apparatus on the other side. As I mentioned, this special counsel, Jack Smith, who was involved in using the IRS to go after the Tea Party, had this phony prosecution of Governor McDonnell overturned unanimously by the U.S. Supreme Court, saying that prosecutions like that have gone too far and are illegal and unconstitutional. And now a guy, one of his last jobs was for the UN's International Criminal Court, whose treaty hasn't even been ratified by the U.S. Senate, but he was picked by Biden and Garland to go after Trump. Trump better get smart very quick and get some legal help of the kind that you represent, because his lawyers are falling down on the job. Now, let me say about Trump and Ukraine. He sort of made noises about not supporting Ukraine. But look, during the Trump administration, the Russians did not invade. They invaded under Obama, and then they waited till Biden was in, and as you say, gave a green light, and then they invaded Ukraine again, and we've seen hundreds of thousands being slaughtered. Now, I did hear Trump at the recent Family Research Council conference in Washington, and he had an interesting formulation. He said, we, meaning the U.S., meaning Biden, allowed Putin to invade Ukraine. And that's exactly what happens. I don't think Trump can solve this thing in 24 hours or one day, as he repeatedly says. He knows that the only thing Putin's going to understand is more and better weapons for Ukraine. These people want to fight for themselves. A Christian nation led by a Jewish president. I'm old enough, so are you, to remember the Reagan doctrine. I was there under Reagan. The Reagan doctrine was, let's support the people when they're fighting the communists, so we don't have to send our own troops directly into battle. That's what we have now. And these Republicans saying cut off Ukraine, that's inevitable then, that our troops are going to be sent into Europe to be slaughtered, to engage in potentially a World War III. We have to avoid that. We have to get smart about this adversary. And as I say again, our book, available on Amazon, predicted all of this. Back from the Dead, Return of the Evil Empire in alliance with China and Iran.
Well, absolutely right, Cliff. And if President Trump had been president, he's absolutely right. There would not have been an invasion. And I have faith that, he was posturing politically and would come to the aid of the Ukrainians in the end. So I'm basically kind of prodding him to, come out with it right now and be clear about it, because yes, we shouldn't be in this situation. It's a very dangerous situation, and it could ignite, frankly, a nuclear war, and by accident at any time. And we've got the same situation with North Korea and Iran and Russia, for that matter. And it's scary when you have a so-called president named Biden, who basically is just about maybe a month away from doing coloring books in the White House. He's not in charge of himself or anything else. So it is crucial. We only have about 1 minute left, so let people know where they can find you. Please support Cliff and what he does. He's a clear thinker, and he's not afraid to say what he believes. That's quite rare in today's world.
Well, please go to our website, usasurvival.org. We publish a lot of material there. We have been heavily censored. All of my 500 YouTube videos were terminated. I was probably the first anti-communist on that platform to be deplatformed, but we're still fighting. We're publishing books, we're publishing articles. I'm doing shows like this. And I'll tell you, support Larry Klayman because he's got the legal strategy that can win.
Thank you, Cliff. God bless you. He'll be back. And next time in Washington, let's get together. I really appreciate everything you do. God bless you.
Thank you.
And now the verdict, fellow patriots, people of faith, those who believe in the vision and creation of our founding fathers. Take stock of your Freedom Watch. We need your support. It's like during World War II, Uncle Sam needs you, those posters. Freedom Watch needs you, and you need Freedom Watch. Because we are unique, as I've said. Just this week, we've announced the criminal conviction of Anthony Fauci, an individual responsible for the deaths of over 10 million people and counting worldwide. We have convicted Joe Biden of bribery from communist China, Ukraine, and Russia. They both will be held accountable. And we're asking law enforcement to enforce the convictions and to have these people arrested peacefully and legally. In 48 states, there's a right of citizen's arrest if you know someone committing a felony, simply on probable cause. You then have to turn them over to law enforcement. And we're not advocating anything violent or in any way non-peaceful. But it's time that we put our foot down. There is strength in numbers. There's strength in convictions. We are doing this with the divine providence as our founding fathers did in the days, months, and years leading up to July 4th, 1776. And I might add, thereafter. Against all odds, we won the first American Revolution. Now we must fight the second American Revolution because as Jefferson predicted, and he said it would happen even sooner, every 20 years or so, we would have to refresh the tree of liberty with the blood of patriots and tyrants. Now, we're not advocating blood for anybody. We want to do it peacefully. But the fact is this country has reached a metastatic state, a cancerous state in terms of the corruption, in terms of the deceit, in terms of the lying. It is worse than Sodom and Gomorrah. It's predicted in our Bible, particularly in our Old Testament, in Isaiah, where it predicts the coming of the Messiah, but it also says that the counselors and the judges must restore the tarnished city to the faithful city. We must do that again if we are to survive. And of course, we brought cases this week for the peaceful protesters of January 6th, the class action in the Northern District of Florida in federal court. That could have the potential of having all of the prosecutions and convictions thrown out because they were illegally surveilled against their Fourth Amendment rights. That's not even in dispute. The so-called government had to admit it because it came out. And I got 2 preliminary injunctions against the NSA during the Obama-Biden administration in 2013 and 2014, and we can do the same thing again. Then, of course, there's our case against the Chinese lab in Wuhan, the communist Chinese lab, where we're pursuing damages for all the people that have been harmed by COVID-19. It's going forward. They will be served shortly. The communist Chinese have dodged service of process. And one thing I want to say is that the actions that we are taking against China or any country should not be held against Chinese Americans. They should not be held against any group in this country who are patriotic to this country. We're talking about communists. We're talking about people who want to destroy this country from overseas. We all need to hang together, or together we will hang. Keep that in mind. And we, the people, will prevail with the grace of God if we do hang together. But we're in a crisis. Go for a drive. Gasoline, over $6 a gallon. Price of food, you can't have a hamburger and a Coke with your friend or your wife or your girlfriend or your boyfriend or whoever, your husband, for less than $60 or $70 in just a basic restaurant. You have rampant crime in the streets. You can't sit in a cafe without fear of being stabbed in the back or robbed. We have a demoralized military. We send our kids to school only to have the teachers teach them perverted lifestyles and ideologies. You think God is sitting around playing patty cakes and doesn't know what's going on? Well, he has empowered you, along with Freedom Watch and others of similar ilk, take matters into our own peaceful and legal hands. And if we don't, as in the Bible, we will perish. He has destroyed several civilizations in similar circumstances. So that's my message for today. Please go to freedomwatchusa.org, support our cause with tax-deductible contributions. We need to get bigger. They're down because the Republicans siphon it off with false promises. And I just want you to remember that the Father and Son will only help us if we help ourselves. And now is the time before it is too late. I'll be back tomorrow with a special podcast, meaning Monday. And of course, next week with an edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Stay tuned. Together, we will win this war against the radical noose that has been put around our necks by the left and those people in our society that want to destroy our Judeo-Christian values. God bless you.